Hey FlossTube, this is Alma coming to you from Long Beach, California. Today is Sunday, February 23rd of the year 2020. This will be a special edition, if you will, of my FlossTube. This won't be a regular update video. I wanted to go ahead and give you guys a brief, hopefully it'll be brief, a video tutorial on how I do my gridding. I did have several people ask me how I did my gridding, and I did have a request to do this video. So at first I thought it was going to be enough to do a quick, Instagram post, kind of do it picture by picture. But there's a lot of explanation that goes into it that doesn't translate well into an Instagram post. So if you do watch my regular updates, then you'll know that next weekend I do plan to start a new piece. So I will be using that for the purposes of this tutorial. That new piece is Mystic Stitch Inc.'s Change of Seasons 2. I'm starting this with Lady Wings Designs Zakia, and again, the timing just worked out so that I had the request for the video tutorial, so go ahead and use that for the example. So there's a lot of preparation that goes before you even start the gridding, which is why I wanted to do a video instead of the picture by picture, because I did want to address that as well. Because that's always a very common question, is how much fabric do I need for my project? And there are websites that will convert or calculate that for you. You plug in the numbers, you plug in the fabric count that you have, the margins that you want to have, and it'll generate that for you. But even those can be a little bit confusing to navigate, so that's why I wanted to go ahead and address that as well. So for this piece, for this project, and most projects will have the dimensions somewhere in the instructions. This one has it right here at the bottom. It's actually really detailed. It gives you the dimensions for several different count fabrics, and at the end it does give you the stitch count that the piece has. So for my take on it, I will go ahead and pretend that this isn't here, right? That this isn't calculated for you. So I will go ahead and do the calculations from scratch, and I've gone ahead and kind of stepped forward in made notes in my Harry Potter notebook. So the stitch count for Change of Seasons 2, and it's laid out at the bottom, is 400 wide by 474 stitches high. So we know that it's going to be this way, landscape or portrait as opposed to landscape, right? And I am working on 18 count fabric. And what that means for anyone that is working on their first project, when they give you a stitch count, they generally give you the stitch count per inch, unless otherwise indicated. Obviously, they may give you the dimensions by centimeters, but for the purposes of this tutorial, we are using inches. So I am using an 18 count white Aida fabric, which means that there's 18 stitches per inch. So once again, we were given the dimensions in stitches, so 400 by 474. So what we need to do in order to convert that to inches is we divide the stitch count by the fabric count, right? So I'm using 18 count, so we're just dividing this by this, and then this by this. So that came out to be 22 by 22.22 by 26.33. That is the bare minimum amount of fabric, dimensions of the fabric that I would need to finish this project. This does not give me any room whatsoever for error or for not measuring the fabric properly. I don't like working like this. It makes me very nervous. In the past I've rounded up to the nearest inch, or if I know that I'm going to be framing this on standard sized frames, you know, your typical 4x6, 8x10, you know, the ones that are just easily found on you know, your craft stores or Target, Joann's, Michael's, wherever. If I do know that I'll be framing that, then I'll go ahead and cut out the fabric using those measurements, obviously rounding up. For a lot of full coverage projects that do have irregular measurements that aren't necessarily your standard size frames, for those I just give myself a 3-inch margin, and I found that 3 inches is the perfect amount of margin. It gives you room, especially if you're like me and you work with Q-snaps, which do since they are the frame itself is round and it's thick, it does take a bit of room for you to go ahead and set it on the fabric. The 3-inch margin does allow me to be able to work on the very edge of the piece without having to worry about the fabric coming off of the Q-snap frame. And as far as what I mean when I say 3-inch margin, I mean that I'm adding 3 inches on both sides, right, of the stitch design. So that means adding 3 on this side and 3 on that side. So you're really adding 6 inches to the stitch design. So what that means for this this project is I'm adding 6 on each side. I mean, and by that I mean long, you know, this way and that way, right? But the final count, the total amount of fabric that I would need came out to be this: 28.22 and 32 by 0.33. So again, that it does include the margin that will allow me to have room to work with it and to frame it, because at this point I don't know what frame I'm going to use. I'm gonna have to look for a frame that will fit this project eventually. So that allows me to say I want to have 1-inch margin, or, you know, use the full 3-inch margin that I will go ahead and give myself. Once you determine the dimensions, you go ahead and you cut the fabric. And at this point, you have to be very careful. Count, double count, triple count. Make sure that you did have the right measurements, and that I always like to just make like a little snip on the edge of the fabric, and then double check to make sure I measured it properly. Make sure that you add the margins on both lengthwise and height-wise. And at that point, once you cut the fabric, there's no going back. If you do make a mistake in cutting the fabric, there's not much you can do coming back from it. So once fabric is cut, once you do have your full-on fabric ready, that's when you can actually start the gridding. And the way that you find the starting point is you just measure whatever margin you gave yourself from the edges of the piece. So I gave myself 3 inches, so I measured 3 inches from the side and then 3 inches from the top, and that is my starting point. That's because I like to start on the top left of each page, because generally with full coverage pieces, you start on page 1, and that generally is the first page of the designs. Obviously, if you work differently, if you like to start from the top right corner, then you just make sure that you adjust the starting point accordingly. But I like to start on the top left corner. So having said that, that's when I started my gridding, and I do use the 8 over 8 under 2 method, which essentially means that you are leaving the first and the last stitch of each square blank, if you will. So when I pull my needle out for the very first time, I'm actually not pulling it out on the very, very, very top corner. I'm doing it on 1 stitch under, because that is going to be the beginning of the over 8 under 2. So I went ahead and I did grid a couple of rows, but I hope this will be enough to explain how I do it. So again, in this situation, I'll see if you can focus on this instead of my face. This mark right here will be the very first stitch. So I started a stitch under it. And I went over 8, but what I like to do is, instead of doing under 2 and doing the entire line down as some people like to do, I actually grid square by square. And what that means is I go across 1. So over 8 and across 1 will get me the bottom edge of that first 10 by 10 square. So I go over 8, across 1 to go on under 1, I suppose. Under but across. That makes sense. And then I do over 8 again. Then I went on 8 going this way. And I just do a little bit of a zigzag. All the way down, until I reach the bottom of the page. So for this particular project, the first page goes from until stitch count 81 going lengthwise, and then 108 stitches going down. So I like to just go ahead and round up to the next square. So for lengthwise, I would do 90 stitches, and then height-wise, I would do 110. So when I started gridding this, I went doing the zigzag, just like so, all the way down until I reached 110. And I do like to mark the 100, each 100 mark. So 100, 200, and I just do a separate line for that. So how this panned out was, I was going this way, then went down, and I went this way. So instead of going across, I went ahead and I did an extra stitch over here, which will fall outside of the stitched area, and then I continued downward. So because this is the end of my gridded area right here, instead of continuing across and down 1, I went across and up. And then I started doing the next row. So I went like this, going down or up, across, up, across, up, across. And what that does is it eventually fills in the spaces left by the first column that you grid. So for example, what that means is that when I eventually start coming down again, my first line will be right here. And again, that will go ahead and fill in all 4 edges of this square. Now, because of the nature of the gridding, obviously this first row will just remain like this with the empty lines over here. But for the rest of the gridded area, they'll all be complete. So another thing that I like to do is I don't like to work, so I grid with Sulky Sliver, which is a metallic thread that you can find it on Amazon. I got mine on Amazon right here. You can get them in various colors. I have it in like this orange gold color, and then I have it in this color. But you can get it in red, you can get it in pretty much any color you want. And the reason I like to work with this is because it's easy to pull out. When I start that very first line, I just do a knot. Like, I know people don't like doing knots, but I mean, you're pulling this out eventually, so it doesn't really matter. But that's why I like to work with this, is because it's easy to pull out. I know people use fishing line as well, but I found that this works just as well. I think fishing line may be a little bit cheaper, but I'm okay with using this. I think it's like $4. So and it does last a long time. I think it's 250 yards of this. So I think it's worth the $4. But yes, that is how I work my way through each piece. I have tried to grid the entire piece at once with June, one of my Heaven and Earth Designs patterns, but it didn't work out for me. I don't like gridded over such huge areas, because as nice as this is to work with, if you cut it in really long lengths, then it does tangle up and it does get knotted up, and when it does get knotted up, it's impossible. It's impossible to fix. So that's why I try working with short lengths. And when I do finish off a length, what I like to do is I try to do it on the edges. So I would either do it on the top edge over here, or bottom edge, or on the side as well. I pull it up and under the same stitch, the same line, maybe like 6 or 7 times, and then I tuck it under. If it does go on the edges, I like to tuck the tail under the frame. And I do like to leave long tails, because in the event, so once I'm done working with this, in the event that the thread does go off the frame, I like leaving the long tails, because that way it doesn't start to unravel as much. That's another thing that I did learn from experience, is if you cut the tail too short, then it does start to unravel, and eventually the gridding does come undone if you don't attend to it. So yes, that is how I do my gridding. I don't know if I've explained it properly. Maybe I should do picture by picture. Again, it's really simple once you do know the mechanics of it. You're really just going, again, over 8, and then 1 across to go across, under, or yeah, so down, across, all the way down, or across. Sometimes I do start gridding across the line and go zigzag this way, but I did want to show you how I marked off the 100 marks as well, so that's why I decided to do it by columns instead of by rows on this time around. So yeah, I don't know if I've explained it properly. I hope I did. If you guys have any more questions, feel free to give me a shout out. Let's see if I can get this to focus, because yeah, so I'm trying to get it to focus on the actual square, so you guys see, like, it's just one stitch that you do across. You just start doing zigzagging all the way, and then once you're coming back up, you just tie it off. Or no, you don't tie it off, you wrap it around and then put it around. And what this mark also lets me know is that way I know that this isn't just the end of this thread, but I also know that the next thread will start down here as well. So it works out that way as well. So yes. Again, feel free to ask me any more questions if you do guys have any. I don't know if I explained this well enough. I tried. But yeah, I'm excited to be starting this piece soon. So you'll probably be seeing a lot of progress done on it in March once I actually started. And yeah, that's it for me, guys. Again, I don't know if I did it properly. Let me know. Bye, guys.